All right, so we want to continue on in our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. We've got 12 chapters total in Ecclesiastes, and we're in chapter 3 now. So we're moving right along, we're making progress, and have enjoyed it so far, studying it, and hopefully we've done an adequate job as teachers to be able to bring some of these teachings of Solomon and present them in ways that's beneficial and edifying and uplifting to you. So far it's been a little bit of a depressing book, maybe a little bit of a negative book, but Solomon does that on purpose. He's setting the stage for what's really important. He's talking about the things of daily life, and he's talking about the things that, how we look at it from an under-the-sun perspective, and he's saying we're going to need to transition to a different way of living, a different way of looking at things, and as the song we just sang, get on the happy side of living, and what is truly joyful, a life that is true joy, not just artificial joy from this life. So to prepare our minds for the study, let's start by reading these first 15 verses of Ecclesiastes chapter 3. I've split these first 8 verses into 2 different columns just because of the flow of it. It's essentially a poem, and so the stanzas are pretty short, so I thought it'd be easy to fit those all onto one slide by doing 2 columns. So here we go, Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it, that men should fear before him. That which is has already been, and what is to be has already been, and God requires an account of what is past. We'll be covering the majority of these first 15 verses. There's going to be a few things that we'll skip over. It won't be necessarily a verse by verse. And Brother Dylan did an excellent job covering the end of chapter 2 this morning. And so we won't be covering verses 12 and 13 really. He did an excellent job of going through that. So we'll be proceeding here with verses 1 through 8. So the title is Eternity on My Mind. This is a title that I'll admit I stole from Alistair Begg, who gave a talk on these same group of verses. I love the title, and we'll be talking a little bit more about the title here as the lesson goes on, but love the title that he chose and wanted to adopt that for this message for us this evening, Eternity on My Mind. Here's an outline of our study. We're going to be looking at essentially 3 groupings of verses. Verses 1 through 8 can be pretty much summed up in the title, The Same Old Routine. The same old routine, talking about the daily activities of life and the things that we go through in life. Verses 9 through 13 is a whole new perspective. And this is where we begin to see a little bit more of a transition in some of Solomon's writings. He's been a little bit negative so far, and so he shifts to a little bit more of a positive thing, something to give us some hope, a whole new perspective. In verses 14 and 15, a reminder that God is in control. So that's our outline for this afternoon, and we'll start out with the same old routine that he talks about in verses 1 through 8. You know, we've got a grouping here, as I mentioned. These first 8 verses are essentially a poem written by Solomon. Of all the titles that he had, I guess you can add poet to the pedigree of Solomon, his resume, so to speak. But these verses, as we know, are often referenced during funerals. If this sounds familiar, that's where we've heard it typically, verses 1 through 8. These are also 28 statements that occur in 14 pairs, and 14 positive statements and 14 somewhat negative statements. Some are a little bit neutral. But one cynical person once said, what you have here are 14 positive statements, 14 negative statements, and it pretty much adds up to nothing at all. And so it's a little bit of a humorous thing. There's a little bit more that we'll dive into. But essentially, when you think about the life under the sun perspective, that is essentially what we have. It's really, there's nothing to really gain from all these things, and we'll explore that now. So one thing that we do want to mention here is this literary term, merismus, which is a literary figure that involves the statement of polar extremes as a way of embracing everything that lies between them. And so a couple of examples would be from the north to the south, or from between heaven and earth. If you're out in the rain and you get soaked head to toe, those are what's known as a merismus. Things that can combine two polar extremes in order to encompass not just those two things, but everything that lies between them. And so what we have, 28 statements, 14 pairs. As we'll see, these are multiples of 7, and the number 7 symbolizes completion or perfection in the Bible. And so what we have are all of these elements taken together collectively are an overall description of life. They're a complete summary of all the seasons of life. It's pretty much an all-encompassing category of items that we see of the various seasons that we encounter in life. Now, I do want to make the point that it's unclear if some of these things are meant to be taken literally or more metaphorically, but we'll explore some of these as we start off. So he starts off by saying, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. And it's interesting as we think about the different seasons of life and we think about the changing of our seasons of nature. It seems like here in the past week, we've experienced all 4 seasons here in Tennessee. With the fluctuation of the temperatures, the changing of the weather, had a little bit of hot weather. It's turned a little bit cold today. And so we see the gradual changing of the seasons. And just as our seasons are cyclical here in this world, so is our human existence. We go through various periods of triumph and tragedy, various periods of joy and sadness. These things are all cyclical. And they're basic patterns of bad times, good times, and some that aren't really, good or bad. They're just in between times. And so that's what Solomon is trying to convey in these first 8 verses. And he hits us with the big one right off the bat. He says there's a time to be born and a time to die. Pretty much start setting the stage for everything that's going to come after. This is what we would probably call the chief merismus that he uses. He starts off with this statement that is going to be all-encompassing of all the statements to follow. You've got these 2 primary poles of life, your birth and your death. And when we think about the things that are written on our tombstone, we've got our name there, and we've got the date we were born and the date that we die. And we've got a little hyphen in the middle that pretty much encompasses all the activities that take place between those 2 dates. And essentially, that's what Solomon is talking about. He's talking about all those things that take place in life. You've got a time to be born, a time to die. I'm going to talk also about all the things that happen in between. He says there's a time to plant and a time to uproot. There's a time for planting seeds, and there's a time that you hope you can reap a harvest of what you've planted. And Jessica and I are at the point right now where we're planting our garden. We might be a little bit behind the 8 ball. We might be a little bit behind some of you that already have your gardens planted. But we're at a point where you're putting in the effort, you're putting in the hard work, and you're hoping that at some point you're going to be able to reap some benefits from that garden and from all that work. There's a time for sowing and a time for reaping. This could also refer to putting down roots and uprooting. And as I look across the audience, I see a number of families that have moved here. I won't start to name names, but we've got a number of families that have moved here in recent years, and you've made the tough decision to uproot your families and to become a part of this family here at Chapel Grove. And that was no easy decision to make. A place that you perhaps once thought would be your home forever, and you decided to move to make this now your home. And we're certainly blessed and thankful to have you all with us, and thankful to have you part of the Chapel Grove family. But there's a time to put down roots and a time to uproot. This also can refer to some of the tough things that happen spiritually that have to be addressed. And this is, I think, made evident pretty clearly, very well in Jeremiah chapter 1. This is God talking to the prophet Jeremiah. He says, "See, I have this day set you over the nations and over the kingdoms, to root out and to pull down, to destroy and to throw down, to build and to plant. So Jeremiah, as a prophet, it was going to be his task to confront and correct the people of Israel, but also there were going to be times where he tried to renew them and to restore them and to build them up. And there's times for both, and that's what our church leadership deals with as well. There's times where things have to be confronted and addressed, and there's also times to celebrate and rejoice and to build others up. So there's a time for everything, a time to plant and a time to uproot and to harvest. Another thing that he mentions is there's a time for war and a time for peace. And it's interesting as we think about the life of David, Solomon's father. His was a life filled with war, filled with a lot of bloodshed. It was not an easy task for him to be king all those years. His was a very hard time of leadership. But interestingly, Solomon is almost the exact opposite here. We see that he wrote during a time of peace, and it was even told by God to David in 1 Chronicles 22 and 9 that this would be the case for Solomon. He says, "Behold, a son shall be born to you, who shall be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies all around. His name shall be Solomon, for I will give peace and quietness to Israel in his days." It's interesting, as Solomon writes these words in Ecclesiastes, he's going through a golden period in Israel's history, a very peaceful time. But we see where Solomon's mind is at. He's thinking about all the different seasons, and perhaps maybe there's time ahead that he knows these good times can't last forever. Perhaps there's going to be some times coming up where war and hardship are coming. And also, as we reflect on some of these statements, they really impact some of the relationships that we have with others. They really involve some of those relationships. When you think about some of these topics of weeping and laughing, mourning, dancing, love and hate, when we think about the seasons of our life, it's not just the hardships that we endure, but the things that we help others to endure and the things that they are going through. We laugh with someone one day, and it may be that very same person that we end up mourning with the next day. The time that we end up rejoicing with someone, it could be that same person who's gone a week later. And we just don't know all these seasons that take place or when they'll happen. But really, a lot of these seasons of life involve our relationships with others. We don't live on an island. And also part of this is painful times in life, killing and tearing down, weeping, mourning, hating, and warring. All of these struggles that we face in life, that's pretty much what all of these things are meant to entail. And I love what David Gibson says in his book, Living Life Backward. He says, "These are the times of life that show us in the most painful of ways that we live east of Eden and under the curse. We live under the curse of sin. And that's why we endure all these hardships in life." And, for us, life seasons are completely out of our control. We can't control the seasons that we go through in this world. We can't control summer and spring. We can't control the seasons that occur in our own lives. We can't just say, well, I'll take 3 hours of joy today if you don't mind, and then next week I'll reserve just 15 minutes of sadness, no more than 15 minutes, if you will. We don't have that within our control. And so all of these things are beyond our scope. And so essentially all of these things encompass life under the sun, these first 8 verses. And so that can be a little bit depressing if we think about it from an under the sun perspective. But what we have introduced beginning in these next set of verses are a little bit of a different perspective and some new hope. Verses 9 and 10 continues a little bit of that same theme. Just like the changing of the seasons, sometimes it's a little bit gradual. He doesn't go immediately from negative to positive. This is a little bit of a transition here. But what profit has the worker from that in which he labors? He's trying to get you to think about what do we have to gain in this life. And Brother Dylan mentioned that very well this morning, and he covered that topic, especially in verses 12 and 13. But what profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I've seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. Have you ever stopped to think about the overall insanity of life? And to set this up a little bit, I'll talk about, I work from home most days. I'm thankful to be able to have that. Hopefully that's something that I can always have, but I'll enjoy it for as long as it lasts. But one of the challenges of working from home is the kids know exactly where I'm at all day. They know that I'm behind this door all day. And to try to explain to my kids what I'm doing there all day long, why are you home but not spending time with us, Dad? And I tried to explain it to Arlie one day. I said, well, Daddy works so that I can make money so we can buy food and buy the things we need. That's what I'm doing in this little room all day. It's a little bit tough to explain to a kid, but it's a little bit tough too when you step back and you think about just, looking at it from the strictly worldly, under the sun perspective. It's a little bit ridiculous if you think about it. We work so that we can make money to buy food so that we can stay alive long enough to work some more, to buy some more food, to stay alive long enough to, you just continue that same cycle. It's a little bit unusual if you think about it from a strictly worldly standpoint. And when you think about the things that the people that focus on just this life as all they have, there's just not enough there for us to really gain any profit. What do we have to gain from all this labor? It's an endless cycle that ultimately profits us nothing. Ecclesiastes 2:11, going back to our a couple of studies ago, all my labor was vanity. There was no profit under the sun. We see all the buildings that he built, all the things that Solomon did in his time of just trying to find meaning in life. And he said all of it ultimately was vapor and vanity. I like what Alistair Begg says as well. We essentially have nowhere plans. Some people just simply have nowhere plans. They have nothing on their agenda. There's nothing they're really aiming for. They're just staying alive to live till tomorrow, to do the whole thing over again, live for the weekend, maybe enjoy a little bit, and then starts Monday again and starts the negative endless cycle. John pointed out recently the Alabama song, I'm in a hurry to get things done. I rush and rush until life's no fun. All I've really got to do is live and die. I'm in a hurry and I don't know why. And that's sadly what a lot of people, the way that they live life. Another song that we can think of, Jimmy Buffett, Margaritaville, wasting away in Margaritaville, looking for my lost shaker of salt. There's really nothing. He's got nothing and a whole lot of, he's nothing and a whole lot of it. And a lot of people have those nowhere plans. But essentially, we see all of the labor and looking strictly from a worldly standpoint, we've got nothing to gain from it. Verse 11, though, is where we see the turning point. There he says, he has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. And here we see the words, he makes everything beautiful in its time, and it's not necessarily that everything's going to be intrinsically beautiful, but it's essentially it's going to be fittingly beautiful in its time. When we think about the seasons of life that we go through and the challenges that we go through, and perhaps you're in one of those challenging times right now, and it's hard to see anything past the point that we're at right now. But when we think about the fact that as we look across, and even if we look back some years ago in our lives, we can see some of the challenging points and essentially who that built us up into, and something that's fittingly beautiful when you look back on it. But in the moment when you're struggling with it, it's hard to see anything but just the sorrow and the negativity that surrounds it. But we know that in God's timing, he makes everything beautiful. The tapestry of our life, he interweaves all of these events. And essentially that's what we are, as a collection of all these events and the people we've come across. And eventually over time we see the beauty of it. I can't help but recall the example of Brother Rusty Thompson and thinking about the life that he lived and the challenges that he endured. Of course, many have shared his example, but thinking about some of the challenges that he faced early in his life, having an abusive alcoholic father, some of the challenges that he went throughout all of his life, losing a couple of kids shortly after or around childbirth. But all of that, looking back, we can't help but have the utmost respect and admiration for how he faced those challenges. And looking back, it made him into someone who was just an incredible individual, and someone that we can all look back and be benefited greatly from his example. God makes everything beautiful in its time. I also love this phrase, and this is probably one of my favorite phrases in the whole book of Ecclesiastes. God has put eternity in our hearts. He's put eternity in our hearts. And it's that little bit of eternity that he's put in our hearts that makes it tough for us to, it kind of throws a wrench in the gears of the worldly perspective and the under the sun perspective. When we think about the fact that we are temporary creatures living in a temporary world, but we've got an eternal soul that will one day live on beyond this. And sometimes the things that we look for in this life to seek satisfaction and the distractions of this life and the challenges of this life essentially it blinds us to all of that. But when we recognize as well why sometimes we face times where we're so miserable, it's because, in part, it's because sometimes maybe we have that under the sun perspective, and we recognize that God's put eternity in our hearts, and we're trying to rectify these perhaps conflicting emotions in our lives. We can't find the satisfaction in this life that we're seeking. It's only in the life that is to come. I like what Gibson says as well. He says, the times of my life are not the only times there are. The times that we're going through in our lives are not the only times we're ever going to have or the only times that are ever going to be. There is an eternity coming. I love the song, Georgia on My Mind, and I know we're shifting gears a little bit, but it helps to really set the stage for this idea. This song, Georgia on My Mind, many will remember Ray Charles sang this song, and we'll read the verses. There's just a few stanzas of this song. Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through, just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. I said, Georgia, Georgia, a song of you comes as sweet and clear as moonlight through the pines. Other arms reach out to me. Other eyes smile tenderly. Still in peaceful dreams I see the road leads back to you. Georgia, Georgia, no peace I find. Just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. This was a song that was written back in 1930 by a couple of songwriters, Hoagie Carmichael and Stuart Gurrell. But it wasn't until Ray Charles sang it in 1960 that it really made the song famous and gave it more depth. But when you think about that song, and it eventually as well became the state song of Georgia. We got a few Georgia natives here that might have known that piece of trivia. But those who remember Ray Charles, he died back in 2004. So we've kind of got a whole generation of people that may not even know who Ray Charles was. But if you recall Ray Charles, of course, he was blind, but he wasn't born blind. He actually was born with sight. It was around the age of 4 or 5 that he began to gradually lose his vision in what was believed to be juvenile glaucoma. And at the age of 7, he was completely blind. So just thinking about that from the standpoint of just a young 7-year-old completely losing their sight. But he was born in Georgia. He moved as an infant. He and his family moved to Florida. But of course, he was a Georgia native. And the place held a deep significance to him. Georgia was a place that he longed for. It was a place that was his homeland. Excuse me. And so, when we think about the fact that there was certainly not much he could remember visually about Georgia, but it was still something that he could recall within his mind of the deep longing that he had. And the song is very moving. It's sung very passionately, this song about Georgia. And as I think about it, we think about him being blind and still recalling Georgia and his affection for his homeland. When we think about that, I think there's something very fitting for us as Christians, very symbolic for us as Christians as we think about our life that is to come and we think about that place, heaven, that is our home, that eternity is in our hearts, and we think about that place that we've never seen. Like the song we sing, we've never been there, but we call it home. And that's similar to what we're going through when we think about the significance that heaven has. We can't see it, but we know it's coming, and we have faith that we will go there someday. Consider these examples in Hebrews chapter 11, where we read of all those great examples of faith, and essentially those examples of God showing his faithfulness to his people. But in verse 13 of chapter 11, it says, "These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them." All these individuals, these great men and women of faith, they were looking ahead to that heavenly country, that heavenly city that God was preparing for them. And we look forward to that as well. God's put eternity in our hearts. Consider also Revelations 21:4. "And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. All those things that he's covering, those negative things in verses 1 through 8, he's saying all those things aren't going to happen anymore. It's going to be bliss in eternity in heaven. We've got a song, as we reflect upon Georgia on my mind. This one was a song that's in our current songbooks that came to my mind. Heaven sounding sweeter all the time. There's just a couple of verses there and then the chorus. But life has been so good I can't complain. When I'm down, God gives me strength to rise again. But I'm weary from the struggle of it all. So I listen, how I listen for his call. Oh, it's hard to lose a loved one to the grave, but we have the blessed hope that Jesus gave. God's going to wipe all the tears from our eyes when we meet in that land beyond the skies. And in the words of the chorus, heaven sounding sweeter all the time. Seems like lately it's always on my mind. Someday I'll leave this world behind. Heaven's sounding sweeter all the time. Eternity's on our minds, brothers and sisters, and we need to be focusing upon that, not becoming distracted by the things of this life, the things that seek to steer us off course. We need to recognize that we have a heavenly citizenship and a heavenly home awaiting us. He also mentions in verse 11, no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Again, this is talking about what we're touching on here in verse 11 are the things that we sometimes try to control in our lives, or we try to understand in our lives, and there's just some changing of the seasons that we will never be able to understand. But it all happens in God's timing. He sees everything from the beginning, and he knows what the ultimate end is going to be for us. And he sees things that we perhaps cannot see. This is, I think, a good analogy to illustrate this for us is those of us who are parents and working with our children. You know, sometimes we try to instill in them some of the dangers of life. Don't play in the road. You need to, make sure you eat your vegetables before you eat your dessert. You know, the things that we sometimes seem a little bit cruel to children. You know, why would mom and dad focus on some of these things or make my life so miserable? But it's because we as parents, we see ultimately what's best for you, and ultimately we will work for your benefit and be the best for your future. And so for us as parents, we need to take a step back and recognize that our Heavenly Father knows what's best for us. We need to essentially become like little children. As Jesus explains in Matthew chapter 18, verse 3, unless you become like a little child, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. We need to recognize that our Heavenly Father knows what's best for us, and we need to make sure that we are navigating through life with that understanding. And recognize that God's got an eternal perspective. He sees the entire picture. He sees the big picture. The problem for us is we can only see a small snippet of life at a time. We can only see just essentially kind of where we're at in this moment in time. It's very difficult for us to stretch out to the panoramic view because we're so focused on the snapshot view. But God has that panoramic and eternal perspective. And Gibson points out, we are not built to see the big picture precisely because we live in time and God does not. And essentially that's the touching point of even pointing out the word time here in this passage, is that God lives beyond time. We live within the confines of time, but God does not. Therefore, it's impossible for us to essentially see things from God's perspective, at least on this side of eternity. The third category that we're going to look at is God is in control, verses 14 and 15. I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it that men should fear before him. That which is has already been, and what is to be has already been. And God requires an account of what is past. I like this quote from David Gibson. We are each writing the story of our lives, but we are not the main author. I love that quote so much. When we think about navigating through life, we think about me and my plans and what I'm doing. And this is ultimately what my future is going to look like. But although we may be writing the story, it's not our story that we're writing. We're writing God's story. And we are not, of course, the main author. God is. And we need to make sure we're living with that understanding. Isaiah 46, verses 9 and 10, remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. Ultimately, I point this passage out just simply to say what we all know, that God is in control. He's in control of all things. He again knows what is ultimately best for us, and it's ultimately up to Him for our destiny. Daniel chapter 4, verses 34 and 35, for His dominion is an everlasting dominion, and His kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to His will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain His hand or say to Him, what have you done? Ultimately, again, pointing out that God is ultimately the one that is authoring all of these events, and it is He that has the dominion and the power forever. We also see from verse 15 that He's a God of justice, and what this phrase says, and God requires an account of what is past. He's going to bring everything into judgment. If we skip to the very end of Ecclesiastes chapter 12, the very, very last verse, for God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. And ultimately, this is important for us because we need to recognize that God's going to remember our deeds, whether they're good or bad. He's going to bring everything into account, and He's going to settle accounts in the end. So we need to be making sure we're doing what we need to be doing. But also, it's a comfort to know that He also will remember the evil deeds of others against us. Romans 12 and 19, beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. So here we see that we shouldn't be focused on getting back at those who've done wrong against us, because we know ultimately, in the end, God's going to bring everything into account. He's going to settle accounts, and He's going to make everything right in the end. If there's any injustice that's happened to us, that's going to be called out on that final day. He's going to make everything right as that final judge. So just a few key takeaways for us this afternoon. Three main takeaways with a couple of bullet points for each. But again, life has many seasons that we go through. Just as we've got 4 seasons that we enjoy throughout the year, our lives have many seasons. We can't control them, try as we might. We cannot control them occurring. But I think what's important for us by looking at this passage is one key takeaway is that we need to have awareness that seasons will change. We need to recognize that if we're going through good times now, we need to recognize that if bad times are on the horizon, I don't say that to be a negative person, but to be realistic, that if bad times are on the horizon or challenges come, they shouldn't catch us completely off guard. We need to recognize that as things occur, we need to recognize, okay, this is that particular season of life, and here's the direction I need to go from here. So I think just having that awareness that the seasons of life are going to change. And if you're in a negative time right now, a challenging time, that should be a great comfort for you, because this too shall pass. And to recognize that there's going to be another season on the way if we will just maintain our faith in God. Secondly, the seasons of this life are not the only seasons we will have. As David Gibson pointed out in his quote, the times that we have right now are not the only times there will be. God's put eternity in our hearts, and we've got an eternity waiting for us on the other side of this life, and we need to make sure we're making the right decisions so that we're on that positive side of eternity. And we also know that God's going to make everything beautiful in its time. We may not see it right now with the challenges we're going through, but God's going to make everything beautiful in His timing. And then lastly, God's in control, and He's going to bring everything into account. You know, we want to try to control everything in our life, but it should come as a great comfort to us to know that God's in control of it, because He knows what's best for us. Because if we were in control, well, essentially we would be God in that instance. But we think that we know what's best for us. But ultimately, do we really? Ultimately, God knows what's going to be for our benefit, and we need to have our confidence in Him. And then lastly, we need to live our lives in anticipation of God's eternal judgment that's coming. So I leave the lesson with you this afternoon. I hope it's been beneficial to you. It's been a group of verses that I've really enjoyed studying and gaining from, and hopefully I've conveyed it in a way that's beneficial to you as we consider the words of the preacher Solomon in this book of Ecclesiastes. We never want to close a service without extending the invitation. If there's one here who's never obeyed the gospel, then this invitation is for you. We want to help you as you get started along that life. Perhaps that you've lived with that under the sun perspective, and you want to get to that above the sun or spiritual perspective and start living your life God's way and getting to that point of having eternity on the horizon for you as well. We want you to have that hope that only can come from God. And so if you want to become a Christian, we encourage you to do that tonight. Come forward. But if you are a Christian and you've committed some wrong of a public nature, or if you want the prayers of the church, we invite you to come as well. Please come as we stand and sing.
We really appreciate you watching this channel and supporting the Chapel Grove Church of Christ YouTube page. I want to ask you a quick question. Do you want to help in a big way spread the gospel and help this channel succeed? All you have to do is click the subscribe button, click a thumbs up, and then share it with a friend. Share it on social media, share it on text. However you do it, just share it for other people to see. It helps the channel grow, it helps the videos get out there, and it helps spread the gospel in a really easy way that has a big effect. Thank you for supporting us, and come back for more videos.